The tap came at exactly 45 seconds. 3 sharp slaps against the canvas. Not loud, but unmistakable. In Chicago Stadium, with 18,000 people packed wall to wall, the sound carried like gunfire. It cut through the roar, the music, the disbelief, and for one long, impossible moment, nobody moved. Because champions don't tap out in 45 seconds. Not world champions, not undefeated champions, and definitely not champions who outweigh their opponent by 135 pounds. But there it was. Barbara Big Bear Morrison, WWE Women's World Champion, 6 feet tall, 275 pounds of raw strength and feared across the wrestling world, was on her knees, gasping for air, her massive hand resting on the mat where she had just surrendered. Across from her stood Bruce Lee, barefoot, calm, lean, 140 pounds. The same man she had mocked on live television less than an hour earlier. The crowd didn't cheer at first. They couldn't. The silence was too heavy. You could hear the hum of the arena lights, the shuffle of feet, the sharp breathing of both competitors. Even the referee hesitated, as if checking reality before signaling the end. Then the noise came. Not applause, not boos. A roar of disbelief so loud it rattled the steel beams of Chicago Stadium. This wasn't scripted. This wasn't choreography. This wasn't wrestling theater. This was something else. And what the newspapers reported the next morning barely scratched the surface of what actually happened that night. Chicago Stadium, October 17, 1970. The event was called Worlds Collide, a cross-promotional exhibition designed to be loud, controversial, and profitable. Wrestling champions versus fighters from other disciplines, boxers, judoka, karate practitioners, each brought in to test their styles against real professional wrestling. But there was no debate about the headliner. Barbara Big Bear Morrison was women's wrestling. At just 27 years old, she had held the WWE Women's World Championship for 3 consecutive years. She had never been pinned, never submitted, never even seriously threatened. She wasn't a performer pretending to be strong. She was strong. Raised on a dairy farm in rural Minnesota, Barbara grew up lifting hay bales before she was 10 and wrestling livestock before she was 15. That kind of upbringing doesn't build show muscles, it builds functional power, the kind that breaks ribs and crushes lungs. Her signature move, the bear hug crush, had hospitalized 5 opponents, cracked ribs, internal bruising, 1 collapsed lung, and WWE officials didn't fake that kind of damage. Barbara stood 6 feet tall, weighed 275 pounds, and carried it like a freight train. Her arms measured 21 inches around, bigger than many professional male bodybuilders. When she walked, the ring boards creaked, and she enjoyed every second of it. Bruce Lee wasn't supposed to be there. Bruce Lee hadn't come to Chicago to fight. He was in town filming a commercial for a watch company, finishing a long day on set when a WWE promoter made an unusual approach. They wanted a martial artist, someone recognizable, to face Barbara in the exhibition. Strict rules: no striking, submission only. At first, Bruce declined. Then the promoter showed him footage, an interview Barbara had given earlier that week on Chicago television. She laughed when martial arts came up. Those kung fu guys do movie tricks, little kicks, little hand chops. Put them in a real ring with a real athlete, and they last about 10 seconds. The interviewer smiled nervously. And Bruce Lee? Barbara smirked. I'd squash him like a bug. I've wrestled bulls bigger than that guy. He weighs what, 130 pounds? It'd be embarrassing. Bruce watched the tape once, then again. Then he made the call. He would accept, but only under certain conditions. A legitimate referee, real submission rules, no scripted outcome, and every dollar of his appearance fee would go to Chicago Children's Hospital. The promoter didn't hesitate. Within 3 days, every seat was sold. Scalpers tripled prices outside the stadium. The newspapers called it David versus Goliath. Nobody expected David to survive. The weigh-in. The weigh-in took place the day before the match in a downtown Chicago hotel. Barbara arrived first. She filled the room. Her singlet stretched across a back so wide she had to turn sideways through the door. When she stepped on the scale, it stopped at 275 pounds exactly. The journalists murmured, cameras flashed. Bruce arrived 30 minutes later. No entourage, no theatrics. Black pants, white shirt. When he stepped on the scale, it read 140 pounds. The room fell quiet. A reporter shouted, "Bruce, how do you fight someone twice your size?" Bruce smiled. Weight is one variable. Leverage, timing, and anatomy are others. Barbara stepped forward, towering over him. "Tonight night," she said, loud enough for every microphone, "I'm going to squeeze you until you tap so fast your movie friends won't have time to yell cut." She extended her hand. Bruce shook it, briefly. He felt the strength immediately, but he didn't flinch. The arena. By nightfall, Chicago Stadium was boiling. Barbara's entrance shook the building. Pyrotechnics, music, a champion feeding off the roar of her people. Bruce's entrance was quiet. No music, no smoke. Just a lean man walking into a ring where everyone expected him to lose. Veteran journalist Mike Terrell wrote later, "I've covered wrestling for 15 years. I've never seen a more obvious mismatch. Morrison looked like a grizzly bear standing next to a house cat." The referee called them to center. Submission only, no strikes, 3 taps or verbal submission. They nodded. The referee raised his hand. "Begin." And Barbara charged. The first mistake. Barbara's plan was simple. Close distance, grab, crush. She lunged forward with shocking speed for her size, arms wide, trying to overwhelm Bruce before he could establish position. Bruce didn't backpedal, he moved sideways. Barbara adjusted, cutting off the angle, driving him towards the corner. She got her hands on him, shoulders, chest, and shoved. The crowd roared. This was it. But instead of resisting, Bruce dropped his weight. His hips shifted, his center of gravity vanished beneath her force. Barbara stumbled forward, catching herself on the ropes as her own momentum betrayed her. The roar changed. Curiosity replaced confidence. Why hadn't he fallen? Barbara turned, irritation flickering across her face. She came again. This time she wrapped him completely. The bear hug. His feet left the ground. The crowd exploded. Barbara squeezed. Harder. And Bruce didn't panic. He didn't fight. He waited. And the clock kept ticking.
Barbara Morrison tightened the bear hug. Not gradually, not cautiously. She committed. Her forearms locked, shoulders rolled forward, chest expanding as she squeezed with the kind of force that had cracked ribs and ended matches in seconds. This was the position where opponents panicked, where lungs collapsed inward and fear did the rest of the work for her. She expected Bruce Lee to gasp. She expected the frantic tapping. It didn't come. Bruce's body stayed unnervingly calm inside her grip. His face didn't twist in pain. His breathing didn't spike. Instead, his torso softened, almost as if he were relaxing into the pressure instead of fighting it. Barbara frowned. This wasn't possible. She squeezed harder. The moment everyone missed. To the crowd, it looked like Bruce was being crushed. But inside the hold, something very different was happening. Bruce wasn't resisting Barbara's strength. He wasn't trying to pry her arms open or muscle his way free. He knew better than that. Against someone 135 pounds heavier, resistance was suicide. Instead, he used a principle deeply embedded in his training. Sink the weight. Bruce relaxed his upper body completely while driving his hips downward and widening his base. His legs spread slightly, knees bent, feet finding invisible traction against the canvas. To Barbara, it felt like Bruce suddenly weighed far more than 140 pounds. Her squeeze tightened, but his ribcage didn't collapse the way she expected. His breathing space, created not by muscle but by structure, remained intact. Her strength had nowhere to go. The crowd didn't understand what they were seeing, but Barbara did. Something was wrong. Frustration enters the ring. Barbara adjusted her grip. It was a small change, just enough to try and regain leverage, but it was the mistake Bruce had been waiting for. In high-level combat, transitions are danger, and Bruce had spent years training for those exact moments. As Barbara shifted her arms, Bruce shifted first. He rotated his hips forward while subtly stepping one foot across her center line. At the same time, he changed his breathing pattern, exhaling sharply to drop his center of gravity even lower. Barbara felt it instantly. Her balance was compromised. Not dramatically, not obviously, but just enough. Borrowed force. Bruce didn't push Barbara, he guided her. Using a combination of jiu-jitsu leverage and Wing Chun mechanics, he allowed her own crushing pressure to continue, just redirected. Her mass moved forward, her feet lagged behind, and suddenly, the strongest woman in wrestling felt weightless. To the crowd, it happened too fast to process. One moment, Barbara was crushing Bruce in her signature hold. The next, she was rolling. The reversal. Barbara hit the mat face down, hard. The sound echoed through Chicago Stadium. Bruce didn't celebrate, didn't pause, didn't look up. He followed her down like water finding a crack. His legs wrapped around her torso instantly, hooks locking in with surgical precision. One arm slid under her chin, the other securing position. The referee's eyes widened. This wasn't wrestling. This was a submission choke. The trap closes. Barbara tried to power out. She planted one knee, then the other, attempting to stand purely through brute force. Under normal circumstances, her strength would have lifted almost anyone off her back. But Bruce wasn't fighting her strength. He was controlling angles. Every time Barbara pushed upward, Bruce shifted with her, hips glued to her center of gravity, legs acting as clamps rather than anchors. She reached back for his head. Nothing. His position made him unreachable. Her breath shortened. The pressure around her neck wasn't painful, but it was terrifying, because it wasn't about pain, it was about blood flow. The realization. Barbara had been wrestling her entire life. She knew exhaustion, she knew muscle burn, she knew pain. This was different. Her vision started narrowing at the edges, a dark tunnel creeping inward. Her coach screamed from ringside, but the words didn't register. The arena noise faded, replaced by a rushing sound inside her ears. Instinct took over. She slapped the mat once, twice, 3 times. 45 seconds. The referee dropped to one knee. Submission! The bell rang. Bruce released the hold instantly and rolled away, placing a steadying hand on Barbara's back to help her breathe. Barbara sucked in air like she had surfaced from deep water. The crowd didn't know how to react. This wasn't domination. This was impossible. Aftermath in the ring. Barbara sat on the canvas, sweat dripping from her hair, one hand at her throat, staring straight ahead. She had never tapped out, not once, not ever. Bruce extended his hand. She looked at it for a long second, then she took it. The respect was immediate and mutual. The referee raised Bruce's hand, still visibly shaken, and Chicago Stadium exploded. Barbara speaks. The post-match interview happened inside the ring. Barbara's voice was honest, raw. "I don't understand what just happened," she admitted. "I had him in my best hold, my strongest position, and somehow I lost control." She shook her head slowly. "That wasn't wrestling. That was something else." Bruce's response was calm, almost instructional.
Barbara is incredibly strong, stronger than anyone I've grappled with. But strength alone cannot overcome proper positioning and efficiency. He gestured lightly. It's not about being stronger, it's about using what you have correctly. The lesson begins. Barbara didn't argue. She listened, and in that moment, still seated on the canvas, still breathing hard, her understanding of combat changed forever. She had lost, but she had learned something far more valuable.
The reaction didn't come immediately. For a few seconds after the bell rang, Chicago Stadium existed in a strange vacuum. 18,000 people standing, mouths open, unsure whether they had just witnessed brilliance or some kind of mistake. Champions didn't tap out like that. Not in 45 seconds. Not to someone half their size. Not in front of the largest crowd of their career. And yet, it had happened. Shock turns into noise. The silence shattered all at once. Cheers collided with boos. People shouted over each other, trying to explain what they'd just seen before the moment slipped away. Wrestling fans argued with martial arts fans. Commentators talked over one another. Camera flashes lit the ring like lightning. Veteran wrestling journalist Mike Terrell later wrote, "I've covered title changes, riots, betrayals, and staged chaos for over 15 years. I have never seen an arena react like this to a submission. This wasn't anger or celebration, it was confusion." Barbara Morrison stood in the ring, towel draped over her shoulders, still processing the fact that she had been forced to surrender for the first time in her professional life. Bruce Lee had already stepped back, arms at his sides, expression calm, as if the outcome was simply the logical conclusion of a technical equation. That contrast unsettled people more than the tap itself. Backstage fallout. Behind the curtain, WWE officials weren't celebrating, they were panicking. This event had been marketed as spectacle, an exhibition designed to showcase wrestling's superiority over outside disciplines. The unspoken assumption was that Barbara would dominate, even if the match went a little longer than expected for drama. No one had planned for submission, certainly not one that clean. Promoters huddled in tense circles. Lawyers were already discussing liability. Executives asked the same question over and over. How did this happen so fast? No one had a good answer. Barbara's locker room. Barbara sat alone on a bench, elbows on her knees, tape still wrapped around her wrists. Her coach paced. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said. "You followed the plan." Barbara nodded, but her eyes were distant. "I didn't feel weak. That's what scares me." He stopped pacing. "What do you mean?" "I wasn't tired. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't overpowered." She looked up at him. "I was outpositioned." That realization hit harder than the loss. The match nobody could explain. By the next morning, newspapers across the country ran headlines that danced around the truth without quite touching it. Wrestling giant shocked by martial artist. David beats Goliath in Chicago exhibition. Movie star submits champion in stunning upset. What they didn't report, because most of the reporters didn't fully understand it, was how. So the footage began circulating. Slow motion, frame by frame, replay after replay. And the more experts watched it, the more uncomfortable they became. The science gets involved. Biomechanics specialists noticed something immediately. Bruce Lee wasn't using his arms, at least not the way people expected. Force wasn't originating from his shoulders or biceps. It was coming from the ground, feet, legs, hips, spine, moving as a single integrated system. One researcher described it bluntly. He wasn't grappling like a wrestler, he was behaving like a lever system.
Barbara, by contrast, was generating enormous power through direct muscular contraction, textbook wrestling pressure, optimized for dominance. When those two systems collided, the smaller system didn't try to overpower the larger one, it repositioned it. That was the difference. Why wrestling officials went quiet. Something else became clear after repeated analysis. If what Bruce Lee could be learned, if positioning and leverage could neutralize extreme size differences, then wrestling had a problem, because wrestling was built on the illusion of inevitability. Big beats small, power wins, mass decides, and that illusion had cracked. Within weeks, WWE quietly canceled future cross-discipline exhibitions. No official explanation was given. The event was never mentioned again on broadcasts. The footage wasn't banned, but it wasn't promoted either. Barbara's decision. Barbara didn't retreat, she adapted. Within 6 months, she began training in submission grappling under instructors who specialized in joint locks and chokes, systems wrestling had largely dismissed at the time. Her style changed. She still dominated opponents with strength, but she no longer relied on it blindly. She learned base control, neck defense, hand fighting, escape mechanics. 2 years later, when she retired undefeated, she gave a rare interview where she addressed the Chicago match directly. Those 45 seconds taught me more than 12 years of winning. They showed me what strength can't fix. Bruce walks away. Bruce Lee never spoke publicly about the match again. No interviews, no demonstrations, no bragging. He donated his appearance fee to the Children's Hospital as promised and returned to his work. When asked privately why he never capitalized on the publicity, he reportedly said, "It wasn't a victory, it was a lesson, and lessons don't belong to the ego." That attitude unsettled people even more than the match itself. The legacy nobody advertised. Over time, whispers replaced headlines. Martial artists talked about the match in hushed tones. Wrestlers debated it behind closed doors. Coaches warned students not to underestimate small men with structure. The sport didn't change overnight, but a crack had formed, one that would eventually grow. The truth that lingered. October 17, 2010 wasn't remembered because a champion lost. It was remembered because a narrative died. The idea that size alone defines combat, that strength without understanding is enough, that technique is decorative instead of decisive. 45 seconds was all it took.